see in your head. You'll escape, changing what you need to make sense of it. That's what's
Hello, all of you beautiful people, and welcome again to another episode of Figurisms. I'm your host, Grant Trimble, and in this show, I talk to creatives of all kinds, such as models, sculptors, painters, etc., that utilize nudity in their work. The whole purpose of this is to try and understand with greater depth the message, meaning, and choices behind the people traveling this path to foster a greater comprehension of the use of nudity in the arts. I myself fall into this category. Why people do this can, of course, be very wide-ranging. Despite the long history of this discipline, there still remains many misunderstandings and objections to this practice, so my aim is to alleviate some of the stigmas surrounding this endeavor. In addition, I hope to add some context to the greater cultural dialogue regarding sexuality by challenging how nudity is perceived in our society. In this episode, I talked to Dan Gluibizzi. Dan got his MFA in printmaking from the University of Cincinnati in 1997 and has been featured in publications such as Vice, High Fructose, and Juxtapose for his watercolor paintings. Dan explains a bit more about this unique process and how he arrived at less quote-unquote clunky work. His words, not mine. We also touch on other subjects such as what gives him the spark to create, making objects for private spaces, growing up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the freedoms raising a child has given him, and much more. Over the course of our conversation, Dan's passion and persistence for the arts, art history, and creating are apparent. I can't help but feel this interview only scratches the surface. As a heads up, the conversation ends somewhat abruptly as I forgot to ask Dan when he needed to get going, but it does little to take away from everything that he shares. My suggestion, as usual, is to sit back, relax, and let what Dan has to say sink in. Would you be able to explain your work to all of us?
Sure. So I make works on paper, and those are essentially watercolors. I use acrylics and inks and watercolors on stretched watercolor paper. They're mostly drawings. I like kind of using watercolors as kind of a coloring way of working. They're not sort of pure watercolor paintings or traditional watercolor paintings. I make collages using collected photographs. Those are done in Photoshop Elements, which is about the extent of my digital knowledge. I then use a projector to make drawings from those collages. Sometimes those drawings become the direct painting, and sometimes I'll draw them a few times because through the process of projecting, things change. So once I have a drawing up on paper, then I mix up some color and make a painting.
How did you you said that the watercolors weren't traditional. How did you come upon this process? I assume it was evolutionary, but do you see kind of where it sort of began?
I studied printmaking, and so I really loved the process of developing a preliminary drawing that would transfer to a plate. And through that process, I essentially stopped transferring things to plates and just dealt with the preliminary drawing as kind of the final drawing. I also studied painting, but never really loved the inside of a painting, where you're sort of 3/4 through trying to figure out how to finish. So I just loved the drawings, and I realized that I could paint the drawings and be done with them. It was a way of, I think, figuring out how to finish artwork. So yeah, it was an evolution over many years.
What didn't you like about that inside of a painting?
This is an ongoing daily studio struggle for me, perhaps. But I think sometimes I just had trouble finishing paintings. And for many years, I think I held that against myself. Like, oh, I can't finish this painting. Or I didn't want the painting to be finished because then it was going to have to be judged as bad. So I would just, I'm going to jump out now. But I realized it was really when my wife was pregnant, and I realized that time was going to change, studio time, everything was going to change. But I really, really wanted to figure out this problem of finishing things. And so that is when I kind of really went back to how I made a print and how I could apply that to the images that I wanted to make. And I devised a process, a plan for myself, so that I didn't feel lost at the end. It still happens all the time, of course. But,
Yeah. I know. I think I can relate to that feeling. Yeah.
So yeah, I just as we all figure out the things that we like to work with, the things that we like to make, I was still holding that idea of the painting on canvas as the ultimate goal for me, and it just wasn't happening in the way that I thought it should happen. And when I was able to make that switch to working almost 100% on paper and 100% in this method that I kind of found, or I mean, it is kind of like watercolor painting, but different in some ways, I think.
Yeah.
I don't build them in the same ways.
Did you see yourself as sort of an artist then at that time with like two disciplines in a sense?
No, I just struggling artist, struggling to find a voice that felt really authentic and comfortable and thoroughly enjoyable. I mean, it's always been enjoyable. There's never, I mean, I never had a problem of setting up a studio anywhere I lived and getting right to work. I just wasn't making anything that was very good.
Then at what point did your work start looking like it does now? Is it because of that process? Did it all change, or were you still dealing with similar subject matter? And or how did your process maybe even look the same, and how did it look different?
Well, I think I was doing thicker painting and building up surfaces, sort of maybe a more normal kind of painting on canvas approach, or painting on panels, small panels when I was in New York City. The themes of the paintings, there were some similarities, and I would come in and out of working with that material.
Have you always worked with nude subject matter? Because most of your work now, the majority of it, or what I've seen anyway, seems to deal with nudity. And I know you do portraits and stuff as well, but have you always worked with that?
I have, yes. Not always with as much intent as I do now. I think that going back to childhood, actually, this was a sort of theme in the work that I liked and the work that I attempted to make. And then in my mid-20s, I had made a few paintings that I really loved, and even had, in my first New York show in a small gallery, they sold, and I delivered them to the collector's home and saw all of this person's amazing erotic art, and felt really at home with all of this work, and very excited. But then I still couldn't figure out how to make it work. It took almost another 10 years.
So what year was this?
1999.
And so when did that, or why did that intent then start? What was it that's kind of clicked?
I think that it was Tumblr. So Tumblr, I think, was born into the world like 2005 or something. And I was always collecting images that I liked from all kinds of sources, ephemera and pornography and art images. They all just sort of went into a file. I really love this image. And it went from being able to find a few images that I liked to millions. And now I'm sure it's in the billions, hundreds of billions. I mean, it's it's just amazing the amount of images that are available. And as I started collecting them, I started seeing them in my files. They almost took shape in the files as I was looking at them. And then as part of my job in working in art galleries, I was able to see sometimes studies by artists. And there was a group of Tom Wesselman drawings that came through where I was working. And it was a study that he had made for one of the great American nude paintings. So it was a sheet of paper, maybe 18 by 24 approximately. Maybe it had like a dozen or 20 nude busts that would eventually become one of the great American nudes. And they were all kind of in a loose grid. And then the one that he liked, he circled. And then that one became the painting. But they all had this subtle variation. And what I saw in the images that I was collecting, if I was collecting nudist imagery or exhibitionist imagery, is they'd all pretty much be the same, but just subtle differences. The elbow was here, the shoulder, the shirt was coming off the shoulder on this side versus the other side in the other picture. So I just kind of lined them up and made some drawings, and it felt really good.
What do you ever find that repetition as you collect all these images and folders and stuff like that? Did you ever find that repetition discouraging, I guess, in regards to human nature? That there was almost these exact same poses over and over and over again. I guess it, in a way, when you start seeing those patterns, to me, it sort of loses an element of mysticism. Did you ever feel that way?
No, I felt the exact opposite, that we are all united by these, united and connected by all of these, just like we all strike the same poses.
Yeah.
And I was seeing that both in, so in Tumblr, when I was collecting a lot, it was where you would find these candid amateur images. So there's, I think, a real distinction between a posed picture that is commercially shot for pornography or some other thing, advertising, any other kind of advertising, versus these like just crazy candid shots. And you can really see the difference. And those poses, I feel like sometimes I would see them at the art museum too. You would see some, just, you could imagine artists just seeing their models or walking around just observing people, just seeing these great poses, natural kind of poses. So no, I think the repetition actually made me more excited about working in this way.
Yeah, there is definitely a distinction, like you said, between the professional and the amateur. A lot of times it's a subtle difference. It's sometimes hard to put your finger on. Are you able to distinguish between those things now, especially I think as the internet, it's more involved in our lives, and I can see definitely people trying to make things like blend this sort of professionalism with this sort of amateurism in a sense. Are you able to?
I mean,
go ahead.
Certainly is the case on Instagram for sure.
Yeah, where it's this sort of like to me, it's always about this balance between like a raw and refined. And that, even I try to capture in my own work, and maybe you do as well, but are you able to sort of distinguish what makes something sort of amateur looking and something quote unquote professional looking in these posed ways?
I think so. I think that it's sometimes there's a corniness to the amateur ones, but it is hard to say. I mean, you're absolutely correct that professional photographers may shoot to have sort of an amateur look. That's certainly, I could think of a few that have done that. But no, I think as I collect images, I think you can tell the difference.
Do you ever get overwhelmed by the volume of images?
Every day, yes. And I've often considered making my collection of images a closed set and then only working with the images that I've collected to this date forever and not adding any new ones. And then I add new ones. So it does. That idea never sticks.
Well, I've read, because I read through on your website, you have a list of places where you've been featured, like publications. I think it's under a press link. So I read through all of those, and one of the there was a quote in there from you, and you mentioned the hunt for the perfect image. Have you found that? Do you feel?
At certain moments, yes, of course. And then it passes, and then you have to look for it again. But yes, absolutely. I will find. So I'll often start a collage, and it will remain unfinished on my desktop for months. And then I will find something. I'll be like, oh, of course, that's exactly where that goes. And then a new collage is ready to make a drawing from.
So it's almost like a puzzle piece.
Absolutely a puzzle piece. Yes. I think of it exactly like that.
Are there certain elements then that you're conscious of that you're looking for, or is it all sort of a subconscious process?
No, I mean, I think that there are times where I'm looking for, I'll do it thematically for sure. So I will go, recently I just enjoyed collecting images of men in Speedos. So I collected several dozen, and they're just fabulous images from all over the world, and just kind of usually middle-aged men of variety of shapes and sizes. And then I kind of, maybe a few of them will find their way into a piece.
So with all of this process, why nudity?
I love the figure, I think, is the number one thing. I love bodies. And I think as you want to make things that are exciting for you to make. And it is one of those things that gives me the spark every time. So I don't find that I would want to maybe challenge that in some ways. It's like, oh, I really want to keep drawing and painting every single day. And this keeps me excited. And of course, then there's this sort of body positive movement and the sex positive movement, and sort of all shapes and sizes, and celebrating kind of all of our similarities and all of our differences. And that just sort of folds in a really wonderful way.
Yeah, the kind of current climate definitely makes it easier in a sense. I've noticed that for myself. We're working with kind of similar subject matter. Whenever you're working with nudity, now it's definitely more accepted than it used to be. It seems, not in all respects, but it has become a little easier.
Well, certainly with platforms like Tumblr, it's just one click away.
Yeah. Well, like you even mentioned there, even with Tumblr, there is something that I've read that you were saying that, there's these extreme categories where it would be like, like you said, men in Speedos, and there will be entire sites dedicated to just men in Speedos. Or I think one of the examples was like women with bongs or something like that.
Yeah.
It would just be an entire site dedicated to these aspects, or these subjects and stuff, and they would all, you could just see thousands and thousands of images with women or with bongs and men in Speedos.
And it's kind of an old tradition. I think that people have been doing scrapbooking of popular culture images, for as long as things have been in print. There's these wonderful books with, just some person out there with scissors and glue kind of assembling these archives of images. Certainly clip art and all of those things that graphic designers use. it is one of the incredible things of our time, this sort of crowdsourcing of archives. And one other thing about Tumblr that I find really interesting is that they will vanish, though. There will be a site that I regularly visit to harvest images or just enjoy the things that have been posted, and it's gone. Just like
Just one
the
day
person
it'll
deleted
just,
it,
oh
vanish,
yeah.
and it is crushing, heartbreaking, annoying,
Yeah.
and so yeah, if I find someone that has, especially with like the nudist imagery, and I find a collection of nudist couples on the beach or something, yeah, I'll collect as many as I can.
With kind of collecting these images, there is still a social element that's taboo around it.
In what way?
Well,
Explain.
Well, it's just like it. Basically, the implication is for most people when they're looking at pornography online, it's for the purpose of masturbating, and it's not to be uncouth and all of it, but I think it's very easy for people, and I can say this from even my own experience when you say, oh, I'm creating art, like I'm with a nude model, or you say you're like looking at stuff online and I think the average person would go, yeah, sure, it's for art. I'm wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You know what I mean? Like they don't quite buy it, so to say. And I didn't know if you've ever kind of gotten any, negative reactions to sort of your process or what you do, or, if there was a time period where people really questioned whether or not it was legitimate. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
I'll say that I really haven't. I guess I don't make these for average people, so I don't know that I care what they think. I guess I think that that no, I think of more, say, like Joseph Cornell looking through all of the incredible book bins in New York City and making these incredible collage boxes, and I find that I'm just like a moth to the flame with these images.
Well, what is the? Sorry, I didn't. If it sounded like you were going to say something, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Nope.
Well, I was just wondering, do you think that there is a distinct mindset that one would need to adopt if someone were to say, "Let me see things the way that you do"? Like, what are some of the key perspectives that one would need to take to see things in the way that you do in that respect?
Well, I look at a lot of art, so I'm often thinking about paintings and sculptures and drawings and photography that I've looked at. I'm definitely not making pornography. I think that I'm not even certain that my artwork is erotic. Um, I I think oftentimes I think in more formal terms about the way that the bodies are shaped, and thinking about rhythm and color uh, and the way that the eye moves around. Not sure that answers the question there.
No, well, I think so. This is where sort of my thought process is, and I think I might have expressed it a little bit when I was talking to Shona in a couple interviews ago. But it's I almost wonder this perspective that we take as artists at being able to sort of exist in these, generally they're natural in one respect, but they're unnatural as far as society goes as a whole. For example, like you're looking through images and there's pornography and nudity and stuff like that, and like in your artwork, like you said, you wouldn't even consider it erotic, which I would actually agree as well. Like I don't see your work and go, oh, that's erotic work. It's trying to, the focus is sex, so to say, or something close to sex. But that's not the average, or that's not where most people stand in regards to all of this. And so I guess I'm curious as to what this process that you sort of take part in and how you see things, how can it benefit other people? Or how can that mindset, how do you think that maybe it can benefit other people? And I think with Shona, I know you said that you listened to that one, but I don't know if maybe you remember this, and I'm sure I probably expressed it better. I'm trying to recollect it, so to say. But
Yeah.
I guess the average person could say, well, why would I even care about seeing things this way?
Yeah.
And I didn't know if maybe you had a thought on that or even a response to that. Kind of, why is it that the way that you're seeing things, why should maybe people challenge themselves to see things that way?
Well, I think not just about my work, but with all artwork in museums and galleries, in street sales and in thrift shops. There is something special about a handmade object made at a certain time in history. And you can unpack some of the things in that object that relate both to the time it was made, the person that made it, and the person that you are looking at it, and the time that you're in, the place that it's in. As far as the average person, again, I'm not sure they're my audience. I was thinking about this when you were, I think there was in the list of questions, you wrote a question about sort of what is the purpose of your work, or what statement does it make to you and others.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reminded of this kind of epiphany that I had doing art installation in New York, where you would get to access the most private spaces of a very high level private collection. And it was such an incredible privilege as an artist to see what collectors were living with in their bedrooms and dressing rooms and bathrooms. And I realized that I wanted to make images for those kinds of spaces, private spaces where people sometimes are never even sharing this artwork with their guests. I think I've never really felt that the large white box gallery was what I was thinking about when I make my work. So I think I'm looking for someone that kind of is already interested in some of these themes, perhaps. I'm not necessarily trying to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I think that's an incredible place to be, especially when you know who your audience is. I think that can make it kind of quite a bit easier. I almost think of this analogy of hunting. I've only been hunting once, and there was I went dove hunting, and they said that if you try and shoot for just like a group of doves, you probably won't hit anything. But if you try and hit just one, then you will most likely, your chances increase, and then your chances increase even more that you might hit another. So it's like, if you shoot for all of them, you're not going to hit anything, and if you go for one of them, maybe you'll get a couple. But no, I think that's a great place to be, and it's also really interesting, like you said, that you're trying to go for people who they're not even necessarily trying to show it to all their friends and family as well. Like you said, it exists in their room, and it's something that's sort of private. Is that when that idea formed? Was when you were seeing these collections, or did you always kind of have that sensibility?
Well, I think in the artwork, I've always liked artwork that wasn't for everyone. And, an early experience growing up in Pennsylvania, getting to peek into the Duchamp Étant Donné. Of course, that's in a public museum and everyone can look in, but there is this moment when you're a kid sort of looking at that and realizing that while you're looking at it, you're the only one looking at it. And I just really loved that feeling.
What?
I think that I would always, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That I've always, I think, so I grew up in an artistic household. So my dad was making paintings and drawings when I was a kid, and still does every day. There were a lot of figure drawings in the house, and nude models were common. And I think it was just something that it was around me as a kid.
Actually, that's what I was gonna. The question I was gonna ask you. I read that your father was or is an artist, and you even remember at one point that I could be making this up. I could be confusing with someone else. But did people were you made fun of the fact that there were nudes in your house, or that there were models that came in? You know, it almost became a point where you were conscious that other people knew of it.
Oh, absolutely. There was my father painted my mother nude when she was pregnant with my brother. So I would have been about third grade, and then the painting would have been finished around the fourth grade. And it was a big painting. It was life-size painting. So this painting would have been, or I may have talked about it to kids. I don't know, but
in a way that was normal when you were talking
to me, it was
to
totally normal.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was totally normal. But then I have to say that I feel like I learned pretty early, or had a good group of friends as a kid, that the kids that would make fun of me for that, they just weren't going to be my friends. So they just weren't my people.
Yeah, you were okay with that pretty early on.
I struggled like everyone does in middle school, but no, I had enough early experiences with the kind of art-minded families to know that there were enough people like me out there.
Did your dad, was he a professional artist like you as well, or did he kind of do that on the side?
When I was a kid, he worked to support the family, and painted in the evenings and in the daytime, whenever he could. But he did become a professional artist, and is just immensely inspiring to see the struggle and know that you do it anyway. You find a situation that works, and you keep at it. And we are very close friends, and we talk about the struggles and successes very often.
So you have kind of a mentor there that's pretty accessible.
Absolutely. And he was pretty young. My parents were pretty young when they had me. So now they're only about 20 years older than me. So we have a lot in common.
Do you just have one sibling?
One sibling who is about 9 years younger. Yeah.
Okay. What did your mom do? Was she artistic as well? I mean, she seems like she would probably be at the very least supportive.
Very supportive. She was artistic, younger, and became a teacher. Yeah, family vacations always included museums, trips to Washington and Philadelphia and New York City. I think that it was all just it was encouraged. The making of things was encouraged.
Is your brother, is he artistically
a musician?
inclined? Okay.
Yeah, musician. Yeah.
So you guys are.
I think he got more. I think he got more of the left brain out of the deal. Because I think he does music. I think he can do the math. I can't do the math.
Yeah. You kind of all understand each other's level, at least.
Yes.
And can even commiserate. Oh, that's really cool. As we were talking about earlier, I always think it's interesting to see, and to understand even people's backgrounds, especially in regards to their work. And one of the questions that I know is even on that list that I sent was, at what point was your perspective formed about nudity, and did it change or did it evolve? Because some people it's very taboo, these elements of nudity and sexuality and stuff, and some people are able to kind of break away from it. And so I'm always kind of curious, what the situation was surrounding, or I guess what it looked like as a child. So it seemed like it was fairly positive.
I had an incredible memory, or I have an incredible memory of being on a nude beach in California in the mid 70s. I was maybe kindergarten age, and it was a river north of San Francisco. And it was just incredible. I just loved it so much. So that was sort of an early memory of sort of adult frolicking nude. Then as a child, I had a friend whose dad had all kinds of Playboys. And we looked at them together, and it was just that it felt very much like the nude beach. It didn't feel taboo. And then, yeah, then you go through the sort of long, drawn out period of childhood where you're just kind of learning how to be a person. I think that it wasn't again until maybe high school that I met my people, my friends that were interested in kind of all the weird stuff that I was interested in.
And you were able to sort of bring back those, maybe those feelings from that you even experienced as a child. And you were able to bring
Absolutely.
them back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There was all kinds of great, like weird bookshops in my hometown. And I worked at a restaurant in high school, and it was just a great mix of gay men and gay women, and it was just great. I mean, everyone was just, it was wonderful. I had a lot of good friends, and I'm still friends with several of those people.
Where do you think that your parents even had that? Where do you think that progressiveness even came from?
Well, they were coming out of the late 60s, so they were kind of mid 70s hippies, kind of.
Yeah.
I think it's just that looking for the new way. I don't know.
Were they religious at all?
I think that yes and no. I think they were raised going to church, but I don't know that either of them felt extremely strongly about it. We went to Quaker meeting when I was a kid, and again, you just end up around like progressive, educated people that I know that Jesus and God was involved, but it wasn't a big part of the reason I felt like we were going.
Was it more so, I guess, for the community rather than, I guess, the spirituality, so to say?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it just seemed like the people at Quaker meeting were much like all of the friends that they had throughout all parts of their lives.
When you say Quaker meeting, I assume it's Quakerism, or would that be the right word? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. I don't know if is that any, does that come out of, what is like that, the Anabaptists? I'm just trying to think of what that would be similar to, because I don't know if I know any Quakers.
Was it Anabaptist? I don't know. I mean, so I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is where the Amish and Mennonite are. William Penn, who is, sort of bought that land that became Pennsylvania, was Quaker. And if there were already Quakers there, or if he invited Quakers to come, but it's the services do not have a preacher, so people sit in silence and then are moved to speak. I was a kid, so I was in Sunday school, which was really fun. It was really painful to sit in silence and with a group of adults. So
Yeah,
I think we came in either like 15 minutes or maybe even 10 minutes at the end. And I remember there just being like some people would stand up and say some Looney Tunes shit. But I mean, really kind and amazing people. Like, lots of activists. I remember they were always protesting something. Yeah.
I have been to I'm drawing a blank now. You even mentioned it. Not the Amish, but what was the other religion that you mentioned?
The Mennonite.
Yeah, the Mennonites. I have been to a Mennonite service. So is it probably similar to that then?
No, I think I think the Quaker meeting that I went to was very different, very progressive and liberal. the Mennonites are, at least in my hometown, are very conservative. In fact, Lancaster, Pennsylvania is very conservative, which is why I don't live there. I don't think I would feel comfortable living there. Although there's many fine people that, there's several colleges and there's all kinds of interesting things happening there. But, just that hometown thing,
Yeah.
But Charles Demuth, the American modernist, lived there. He spent a lot of time in New York City. He was part of a really cool circle of artists, George O'Keeffe and Stieglitz and Marsden Hartley. But he made all of his paintings in Lancaster. And he would occasionally like to make fun of the sort of backward conservative nature of the Amish and the Mennonite. But he still lived there.
He liked it enough to stay.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful sort of Revolutionary War, Civil War era town. So it's very pretty.
I'll have to check it out. I don't know too much about that. But yeah, I mean, my wife she's from upstate New York, Albany area, and I know there are some areas where there's it's probably somewhat similar. So then you went from growing up in an atypical household where your parents seemed relatively open, but you said you were able to find kind of a group in high school and really connect, and not that you didn't feel like an outcast, but at least you had a kind of a close group of people. At what point did your art career, or did your focus on art really start becoming a thing?
I think in undergraduate college, in high school, I was always in the art class. I think everyone sort of knew me as the kid that likes to make art, but I don't think I made that conscious decision to be an artist until undergraduate college. I think I was pretty insecure, and maybe am to this day, about how I came to art through my father. And I mean, it's totally normal throughout art history that art would be a family business. But I think right now, in the world we live in, maybe the artist is supposed to, come to it through feeling like an outsider or something. And it just wasn't the case for me. I was just exposed to it from the very beginning. But you still have to make that kind of conscious choice. I'm going to do this. So it happened over several years where, you try out some different things, or you have some good years and bad years. But pretty much by the end of undergraduate college, I knew that that's what I was going to be doing.
What did your work look like at that point?
I was heavily into figure drawing and printmaking. I figured that I would teach college. So I went directly to get an MFA at University of Cincinnati at 22 years old, and really thought I would do printmaking, learn how to become a figure drawing instructor, and teach drawing at a college.
A very pragmatic approach to all of it.
It felt very like right on, like I'm going to do this. And I became a TA, and I don't want to say I was miserable, because I really do enjoy talking to students about art. I just could not imagine doing it every year. And I saw my fellow classmates who were also TAing. It just seemed so natural for them to get their class kind of herded into making drawings in a certain way. And I really enjoyed the process of exposing my students to new artists or telling them about weird things that they hadn't heard of before. But the idea of getting a group of 15 or 20 students to shade in a certain way, no, I could not see myself doing that. And then there's politics involved in becoming a teacher that I didn't feel that I was going to be able to do. There was a professor from another school came to DAP and said, look, if you want to teach, you're going to find a job somewhere. But if you are less than 100% sure that you want to teach, just know that you're competing against people who are like 150% sure that they're going to teach. And I really wanted to live in New York City. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to move to New York City. I'm not going to worry about applying for teaching jobs, or even like just the thought of creating a CV and going to all the conferences. And it just didn't seem like the right path.
What was it about it that didn't seem like the right path? Was it just like kind of did it make you cringe just thinking about it? Or do you know why,
Yeah,
I guess
well,
specifically?
well, I really enjoyed interacting with students, but the majority, I liked the students that were struggling, and I liked the students that were naturals. And then the majority of the class are just kids taking the class. Of course, you have to treat everybody the same. I just couldn't imagine like doing that year after year. So I did feel very bad about it, actually, because I thought like I was meant to do this, and then I had to not do it. And then the politics of teaching maybe seemed like it was not something I was going to be capable of doing.
Was this
like getting the jobs?
yeah.
Basically.
Like you knew so I think of myself like if I were in that situation, because I've run into play like times where I've tried to convince myself that no, I'm just being picky about it or something like that. I mean, was there like a lot of turmoil at this time for you, or was it just kind of like, I don't know if I really like this. No, I don't really want to do it anymore. Goodbye, kind of teaching world. And did you like struggle with this decision?
I mean, I had only been a TA, so I can't say that I was fully involved in the teaching world, but it was enough of a taste to know that I didn't really want to go any further. So no, it wasn't a very difficult decision. I packed up the car and moved to New York City, and became a security guard at a museum.
Oh, and what year was this? This was 90, probably in the mid
98.
98. Okay.
90, yeah, like 97 to 98. Okay. And I was a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was.
I have to ask you before we move on to New York City, because you're in Cincinnati. Yeah. I'm from Cincinnati. I like to think that maybe we, I was pretty young at that point, but maybe we crossed paths at a coffee shop or something like that. Like do you remember Caldy's, or I don't know if like the Buzz?
That's the one is it Over the Rhine or downtown area? Or
it's not there anymore, but that place Caldy's.
I definitely went there.
Yeah,
I went there.
So I'm sure we probably met. So let's settle on it. No, but that's kind of funny just thinking of like all those places and stuff like that. But so anyway, no, I did that for my own amusement, but I'm sorry.
Yeah. No,
but
and I think that the Cincinnati Art Museum is incredible, and that kind of Frank Duveneck whole scene of 19th century kind of way of seeing the world. I love so many paintings in that collection, and I loved going to that museum. Yeah,
it is a beautiful museum. I try to get there, especially take the kids and stuff. Try to get there every so often, but So then then you started working in a museum as a security guard. Why New York City? I mean, I guess that might seem like a somewhat obvious answer, but was there anything in particular other than it's just New York City?
Well, it was sort of the focus of my life as a teenager. We would go there quite often to see art shows. We had some family there, and I was interested in punk rock music, so sometimes I would get to go to New York for a show. And the East Village just was my ideal place in the world. I loved walking around there and thought, I am going to be an adult here. I to this day love that feeling, but New York is changing all the time. So by the time you get there, it's not the East Village that you remember from when you were a teenager. It's something different. It's something interesting, but it's not the same. And so that happened several times to me throughout. I lived in New York City twice, where you're like, oh, I was coming for this thing, and then this other thing was there. I'm sure that if I went to New York City now, it would be a completely different city than the one I remember.
The one you've experienced and knew intimately.
Yes, where I have to say my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, is not that way.
It's not progressing at a rapid pace.
No.
with
Some parts,
the
maybe.
Quakers and the Mennonites and yeah.
There is an art school in Lancaster now, and I could definitely tell the change. There was a lot of cool stuff going on, but no, not like. But yeah, I was very focused. You know, my dad was interested in a lot of the artists that were showing in New York. When I was in high school, we would go to see shows, specific shows. We'd drive the 3 hours, park in Soho, go see the shows.
Which, for example,
And
what are some examples of the shows?
The painter Eric Fischel would have been one that we would have gone specifically to see, and I think what's really interesting is that those are still really a lot of the similar themes that I love, of the kind of that kind of nudity, those kinds of spaces that he paints. Yeah, one of my favorite artists.
So now you're in New York City and you're able to kind of be in it all the time, not just travel every so often. What did your time look like there in New York?
Lots of museum visits. Of course, I was spending full time at a museum, which was a really incredible way to decompress after art school. You're in the art studios making things, but to stand in the galleries with the paintings and sculptures and other objects for that many hours, it's a pretty incredible feeling. I was just starting out trying to see everything. Yeah, I mean, New York City is crazy. I lived there twice, and I think about the first time and the second time, all of the things I did right, the things I did wrong. It's super complicated.
So
Yeah.
then, when was the second time that you lived there? You say this was like 97, 98 to what years?
Yeah, in 2001, I moved to Boston and worked at Harvard University at the Fogg Museum in the exhibitions department. So after leaving the Met, which was low paying, I discovered that I had an interest and skill in art handling. So I installed art shows, moved art around the city, and eventually landed this position at a museum in Boston. And I would say that professionally, that was the first time that I really felt like where I was somewhere where I belonged, and absolutely loved every minute of it. I think that all of the people I worked with were artists. We were all had our little studios, and we were kind of doing the best that we could. And it was, yeah, just one of those incredible times in your life.
So when you say art handling, I assume that's quite literal. You would actually take the pieces and secure them and move them around the city. Is that?
Yeah, it's a common job for artists. Almost all of my colleagues were artists throughout the 15 years that I considered myself an art handler. And yeah, I mean, from every single aspect of the process of artwork being at artist studios or warehouses, galleries, auction houses. Sometimes you'd work for a gallery, sometimes you work for a warehouse, sometimes you work for an auction house. But yeah, you're the person, you and your colleagues are the people that crate the things, move the things, install the thing, make sure it's safe, light it. And then that's where I had these moments of getting to deliver artwork to collectors' homes in New York City and in Los Angeles or in Florida. And I feel like you see art in an entirely different way than when you're in the white box gallery or even the museum gallery. I think when you see a work of art in someone's home, it's very much alive. And it was a very powerful feeling and very inspiring to get to work in the studio.
Because you see it where it actually was made to really kind of exist in a sense. Or
Well, I don't necessarily know if the objects were made to be in homes. I mean, certainly some of them were, but like, I remember just having like a really incredibly powerful experience with an Alex Katz painting that was in, somebody's house. And you're just like, my gosh, oh my gosh, I have to get to work right now. um, and, and I do wonder if you have that same feeling when it's on a giant wall in some exhibition space. The painting was in the house, people were like living around it, and it was really alive. It was cool.
so then is that seems to be almost what you're trying to capture in your work. Like you said, you're doing it for very almost kind of a very specific clientele or a type of person, so to say. And it seems it might have left a big impression on you. I could be wrong.
No,
That,
I think that that's exactly right. That I would like to make objects that find their way into people's private daily lives.
yeah, that almost reminds me of so often, we experience art and it is on the screen, on our screens. It's backlit. I think you've even mentioned that in some of those articles. It's all backlit and it can all look very nice and pretty, and the way that we're consuming it, it's incredibly it's at a very rapid pace, which doesn't really quite give it justice. But it reminds me of a story of, so one of my favorite artists has always been Matisse, and I think that I'm pretty sure it was him that I was reading a story that he actually purchased, saved a bunch of money and purchased, I think it was a Van Gogh, and
Okay.
that was like one of his prized possessions. And he said he had it on his wall and he would just look at that piece. And there might have been another piece that he had purchased. So he had like two, real pieces from artists hanging on his wall. And that's something that most people don't experience. And
Yeah.
you got to see that, day in and day out, it seems like.
Yes, it made a big impact for sure.
Yeah, and you think of now how what most people, when they think of art, it's all on their, it's on their phones. Do you find that sad in any way, or?
Personally, I do, because when I lived in New York or Los Angeles, I would see art all the time, go to galleries and museums, and I don't do it as much now. There's a different pace to my life, and I certainly go see my friends' shows here in Portland or visit the museum, but I do not go to art shows the way that I used to when I was younger. But I'm in my studio more, and I think that that's sort of one of the things that it was important to recognize about 10 years ago, that you could live in New York City and be a part of the art world and see all the shows. But if you do not have that time to make the work, if that's something that you really want to do, something has to give. And it was very scary for me because I really identified myself with those big cities. But now I identify myself with my studio, and it's an incredible feeling.
And then you lived in LA, you mentioned, I know when we first started talking, right?
I did,
is that right?
and that is where I met my wife and why my child is on the planet. So it was, I think, after sort of the short story of Harvard of the Fogg Art Museum was, I loved the work, but living in Cambridge didn't seem like a full life for me. It's a pretty small area, and Working on a college campus, you end up feeling like you're going to get older, but everybody around you is going to stay the same age. And the exhibitions department, I think you could live an entirely wonderful and fulfilling life installing art shows at the Fogg Museum for your entire career. It just didn't feel like something I could do. I just needed to adventure a little bit. And so when I had an opportunity to explore Los Angeles, I definitely jumped at it. I worked at museums, installed artwork. And in Los Angeles, I had more time. It was a little bit cheaper to live there at that time. And I was able to get the studio that I envisioned for myself up and running a little bit more. I still was making pretty clunky things, but I felt like maybe for the first time that I was really happy in my own studio.
When you say you were making clunky things, what do you mean?
They were bad.
So what is your perspective of the art that you were doing at this time? So as you're working and installing art and working in all these galleries and being exposed to, priceless pieces, then you would go to your studio. In my mind, it'd be kind of depressing, like be like, oh my gosh, like you see how far you have to go, especially compared to masters. What was that time in your studio? What did that look like through all those years?
I mean, your example of Matisse looking at the Van Gogh is more accurate, which is that I didn't find it depressing. I found it actually very exhilarating and energizing. Anytime I would visit an artist's studio through a gallery, or I just wanted to see everything, how they were doing it, what made it all tick. I loved seeing behind the scenes. No, I found it all energizing. And I think the only thing that the art world working as in the support staff of the art world, one of the dangers, and I definitely suffered from it at various points, is a kind of cynicism, not about talent, not about quality, but just you realize how hard it is to succeed and how the people that succeed are such super talents. Not that you're not loving what you're making in your studio, but sometimes you can recognize like, oh, right, they're really, really good.
Yeah.
And I have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But I think I was able to balance that at the same time with like, oh no, it's still really exciting to try, to make stuff, push it. Like, I'm going to try this way of making it, this way of making it. And I think that drive was always present, even if I was suffering from some cynicism.
Do you attribute your success and kind of where you are to that drive?
Yes. Certainly I've had many little lucky breaks, and I think that there's never going to be one big break. There's going to be lots of little breaks, and you don't know where they're going to go. But I think that I love being in the studio, and it's like my job and my hobby at the same time.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, there's definitely been moments of those kind of realizations when you understand how far it is you need to go, and you understand why the greats are so great. And I remember when I first started playing music, and you get better and better and better, and there seems to be a point that you reach where you go, yeah, I got this. Like, I've kind of figured it out. And then usually something happens where you realize how bad you are, or not really necessarily how bad you are, but how good other people are. And for a moment, I can say for myself, it kind of destroys your world a little bit, or maybe your ego, not in an unhealthy way at all, but you just realize like, oh my gosh, like I'm really not good at all. And that's where, the true learning seems to begin, is when, life kind of humbles you and you accept where you are, and that it's, just a infinite path to kind of travel down. And I think that's where the great artists, they've accepted that, okay, I'm cool with the fact that I'm never, ever going to be perfect, or, everyone knows that to a degree, but I'm fine with not being perfect at this and not being a quote unquote master. there's always just that journey of kind of becoming.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that there's really any such thing as a master. I think that, it's always just the sort of journey that each person is on. But for sure, I mean, one of the great things of going to museums is to engage with those people that excel at their craft at the highest level. It's very inspiring.
At what point then did you feel like you started hitting your stride with your work? You mentioned it being clunky. When did it stop feeling? When did it stop feeling clunky?
Right around, it's gonna sound totally obvious. Right around the time that I stopped working full time, I was able to stay home with our child when she was an infant, and of course, it's a very challenging and exciting job to have an infant. But what I found was that I was so tired after doing 50 hours at the gallery that it was really hard to even think. But after doing a full week or long days with a baby, but I could still think. I was home. I wasn't like carrying heavy crates everywhere or getting yelled at by this person or that person about some artwork that wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was very demanding to have, be the primary caregiver for an infant and newborn. But I felt like I had more time to think about art than I ever did before. And I think that I used that time well. And then we moved to Portland, and all of a sudden I had a larger studio, and it just, things started happening. I don't know. I think I also was able for the first time to edit out a lot of things I had been working on and realize, okay, I tried that idea over and over and over again. I don't have to do that idea anymore. But it just took a long time for me. And I think that was a big deal to realize that maybe I am a late bloomer and that it took me 20 years to get to here, and I'm so happy about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, your work definitely, it stands out. Hearing all this, you can tell it seems to very much be a testament to just persistence. And obviously, you have a discerning eye. You know what I mean? You're able to be around all these incredible pieces of work, even as a kid growing up around a father who was creative, and it seems like you admire, not just probably as a person, but even his art as well. And
For sure.
just to be able to just keep going at it, I think that there's that in itself there's a story in that.
Yeah, I think another big component to my feeling of personal success is the relationships that I've maintained throughout my adult life. I am still in daily contact with my closest friend from college, and my art friends that go back 20 years are still the kind of people that I rely on, both as encouragement and then just to see the hard work that they're doing. I think in some ways, like the shame of letting your friends down keeps me going. Like,
oh yeah, I think that's positive. Yeah.
if my best friend knew that I like wasn't working hard in the studio, he would yell at me. And
that's good.
And I think keeping those kinds of relationships in your life is really important. It's
there's an accountability there, and it's not just you. We're social beings, and it's we don't live autonomously. And I think that kind of speaks to that.
I think also the art is a social business, so the professional aspect of it is you have to keep up your relationships. And I think you meet someone on a job site 10 years ago in New York City, and they're an interesting artist, an interesting person, and you do your best to maintain that relationship, because artists will help one another. And that's been actually one of the most wonderful things about Instagram is I feel like I have a bunch of wonderful colleagues that I can reach out to.
Yeah, and at your fingertips all the time. Yeah.
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 I find that, like, I do complain about Instagram in that the way that we look at art has changed for sure. But the positive feedback, the sort of applause therapy aspect of it is very good. It's very good for me.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
then what are some of the challenges that you face now then in creating?
Well, now I feel, when I was working in the art world, in the galleries, I always wanted to be a professional artist. I didn't really know what that meant, but I wanted to feel that I was a professional artist. Now I am a professional artist, and it is very difficult. So balancing the budgets, making sure that I meet my deadlines, staying positive about my ideas, reaching out for new opportunities, all of the nuts and bolts of operating a professional artist studio. It's a daily challenge that I find very exciting, but it's real.
Who is there to help you with that? It sounds like, your wife, she's a significant part of, not to say necessarily, I don't know, work is the right word for it, but seems to play a significant role in support anyway. Does she support you in those aspects? And does she help you kind of with running things in that way?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that I'm also still looking after our child, and I sort of found a balance that works, where I contribute as much as I can. I kind of my studio practice is kind of like a full-time job that is kind of gets paid like a crappy part-time job, but I love it so much that it's absolutely great. But yes, we are we are family, and certainly would go back to work if it was necessary.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking even just about, like you said, the kind of the nuts and bolts of, because I mean, being an artist, it really is about running a business or a brand in a sense. And as much as I think artists may not like those terminologies, um, there's definitely similar elements, and they might not exist in the same way. Say, like, obviously Nike would do it, but
Right.
there still are kind of fundamental aspects of, like marketing. Like, you have to get your stuff out there somehow, and you know what I mean. Just like there's a lot of very practical things that you have to do that go beyond just simply making art,
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
that is, I mean, I find that's the most overwhelming aspect of all of it.
Yeah.
Making art is hard enough in itself, but then like thinking of all of that stuff on top of it, it's just like, oh my gosh, like no wonder why people had, like musicians have managers, and there's all of that stuff. That's
And
difficult.
and I have galleries that work very hard for me, and I am very grateful for that. But you still have to do a lot on your own, and that's just part of it. And you chip away every day, and sort of any little success, you sort of have to bask in it.
Yeah, yeah, take it in. You brought this up before, but success, like, what does that look like to you?
Staying in the studio, I would say, is sort of my number one way. Sort of getting to do it in a daily way, staying healthy to kind of be able to do that. I think that's sort of, you sort of maintain the ability to do it, I think. So, and then outward success, like I always want more shows. I want like to engage with different audiences. Of course, you want all of those things, but I think that the real success of it is the way that you feel in the studio, that you're in the studio, and that it feels very current and fresh, and that you're challenging yourself, but also feeling the rhythm and comfort of approaches to making that keep you going. There's a really amazing thing that I listen to often by an artist named Teresita Fernandez. And she did a commencement address, I think at Virginia Commonwealth. And she talks about this very thing of this sort of idea of inward and outward success. And I really feel that I felt it where you are in the studio, in that zone of making or looking or planning for something, and you really think, wow, I'm really doing this. This feels great. So I highly recommend her commencement address for you. And
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. Yeah. No. So then, as you're in the studio and you're making and you're creating, you mentioned that earlier that you aren't really doing it for everybody. You have a sort of a specific person or a group of people in mind. How much is that defined? That person or that entity?
it's pretty loose. Yeah, I think it's pretty loose. I think that
It's not like a man between 5'10" and 6. Well, yeah, I didn't know if you because there was someone this writer that I listened to one time, and they said that one of their recommendations is, or when they say they write something, they have basically 4 people that they have in mind as to who they're writing this book for. It's like people that they personally know. And like when they write a book, they go, if I get off track and I start thinking of, I'm writing this for the general public or for, some something that academic, there, like it's not going to turn out. It's like these 4 people are who I'm writing this for, and that's where I really kind of their success kind of comes from. Is the more they're able to hone in on that, the more it's able to really be very powerful and strong. I didn't know if you had something similar.
I have those people, but
You
no,
don't have
I'm
to
not
tell.
always.
You don't have to tell me.
Yeah, I'm not always making the work for them, but
Yeah.
but for sure, I have very trusted people. Yeah.
And then when you're making your work, because a lot of it does revolve around nudity, what is it that you're trying to give to them?
Well, I think that some of the source material, the original source material, is not something. It's not really enjoyable for everyone to look at, and yet I find that I can sometimes filter it in a way that people can see what I see. And so then that's sort of my goal, is if that I can say someone is, I would hate to look at this kind of image as a photograph, but the way that you draw and paint it, I see the beauty or the interesting pose or the rhythm with these other figures. I think that's kind of what I'm going after. Kind of translating some of these images out of one world into another world.
What is it about working with images that revolve around nudity? What is there something specific that you're trying to draw and show people?
Well, I think it's the spark, again, of what draws me to the studio or what draws me to look at images. I really like that material and enjoy sharing it with other people. I think that there is a kind of uniting quality of some of these images, especially the images of the nudist couples kind of embracing at the water's edge. This is non-sexual nudity. These are people just being human together, and I find them to be really beautiful images and really fun to work with.
Well, that even just reminds me what you brought up when you said you were younger and you went to a nude beach. it seems somewhat similar. Like you said, non-sexual nudity. There is like an element of liberation in it, and I don't know. I think there's a joy that a lot of people probably they miss a lot of the times.
Perhaps I don't know. I don't know. I think that some of the folks that connect with my work, I think they see it. So that always makes me very happy.
One of the things you mentioned specifically, especially Tumblr, one of the things that I didn't like about Tumblr was when people would take my images and recontextualize them, which would
Yeah.
ultimately change the dynamic of the image. And that's something that really kind of bothered me. What your work almost does is it takes what people do on Tumblr, which is sort of recontextualize images in their own way, like you said, almost like it's in a way a tradition of scrapbooking, but they'll recontextualize images to sort of fit what they want. What you almost seem to be doing is then recontextualizing their recontextualization. And that's like what I the more I started reading about you and finding out, and the more I would look at your work and know that it was especially being sourced from specifically Tumblr, there is that very much seemed to be like what you were doing in return.
Yeah.
And in doing it in a way too, like your work and your figures are, I guess the way that I would put it, are very symbolic of people, obviously, rather than being literal. And
Exactly.
the way that I almost think of it is, if you were to ask someone to draw a heart, they would draw a symbol of a heart, right? With like the two bumps that come down into a point.
Yes.
And that's very much our brains like to work in that function, I assume, because it's about efficiency. But if you were to ask someone to draw a heart, they wouldn't draw a literal heart. They would draw a symbol of a heart. And your work seems to kind of play on that, kind of this utilizing or creating figures as sort of symbols. I didn't know if that.
I like that.
Oh, well, I didn't know if that was something that, if I was even accurate in any way of, seeing it as that, but I didn't know if. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, to answer or to comment on this, I'll say that in my first time around in New York City, I went to a lecture by the painter John Curran. He was lecturing at the same time with Lisa Yuskavich at the New York Academy, like the New York Figurative Academy or New York Academy. Anyway, John Curran and Lisa Yuskavich, one of my favorite artists. And John Curran was talking about how all artists had to sort of come to terms with photography. And he may have gone on to talk more about that point, but that just, I think that was in 99. So like that has really, really stuck with me. And as a collector of images since I was a kid, I always saw that I was collecting the image, but I was also collecting the piece of paper that was the image. And so, of course, when you get into art school, you learn about photorealism, where the artist is painting the photograph that has the image on it. Like they're not painting that scene that you're looking at necessarily. They're painting that photograph of that scene. And the idea of the image having an objectness to it. So sometimes when I collect these images and then print them out, they might hang around the studio for a while. And I get kind of attached to who those people might be. And I want a very specific record of their shape. But I know that I can't capture who they really are because I don't know them. And I also am not making a cartoon of who these people are.
It's not just a characterization.
So I think that that's maybe what comes to your point of them becoming a kind of symbol. They are an individual, and then they are also a printed object of that individual, and then they are sort of everyone, or the potential of everyone.
Yeah, like it's somewhat nondescript enough to be a multitude, rather than a specific, but there still holds that semblance of a specific, like,
They each have
moment.
unique they each have unique bodies, and I love the you know all the different shapes and sizes. I want just everyone to be included in my work, and so I'm always just seeking out yeah, I just love all the different shapes,
Well,
all the bumps.
that's so one of my favorite books has always been The Stranger, and one of the things I always really loved about the way, but the one, Albert Camus, what I always
Yeah.
loved about it was how the language was so sparse, but the language, it was at the same time, it was the the words were perfect, just enough to give you like a bare bones, but somehow it was able to really stimulate your imagination to create a very vivid image around all of it. And I think that's in a way kind of what your work seems to do as well, is you add just enough to allow allow people to sort of fill in a lot of the gaps themselves. You know what I mean? But it's
Yeah.
not that it's lacking. It's not lacking something. It's like it's just enough is there for it to really be something in someone's mind, but at the same time allow them to add to it. And
Thank you.
yeah, well,
So,
it's incredible work, and it stands out quite a bit. And there was one question that I did have in regards to it, very specifically, and that is, what was the reasoning behind making the eyes blank? Because it reminds me of like Modigliani, and I didn't know if
right.
there was a.
Yeah, I like how he treats the eyes. So I had mentioned Wesselman earlier, and Wesselman will just not paint the face at all, or sometimes just the lips and mouth. But I um, I knew that I wanted to use these images I was collecting, but there is a problem for me of the face, which is that if you are drawing the face too carefully, it just looked weird, or you were having to deal with expression, which would change the focus of the piece. And so I was just struck by old comics, so like the Orphan Annie comics, or
Oh yeah.
I think that the maybe some Little Nemo or something. There was like, or Nemo in Slumberland, or one of those sort of older comics where they're just this little gesture, this little flip that becomes the eye, was enough to give you a sense of form, and you didn't really have to describe it any further. And so it's evolved over the years, and I think that I'm always wondering, like, I will attempt to do fully realized eyes, or do some other solution, but it just really, I enjoy doing it that way. And so again, it's that thing where you want to go to the studio and do it just the way you want to do
Yeah.
it. Like, I'm going to the studio, I'm going to do it this way.
Because I can.
Yeah.
As you go through all these images, and especially with your background, it being more probably liberal than most in terms of nudity and sexuality, um, where do you really distinguish between pornography and nude art?
I think intention. I think that the uh, the reason why something is made um, has a lot to do with it. Certainly, things can be moved into different contexts and have sort of a different feel. But I think why something is made, and I I am extremely fascinated by the ways that pornography has been made over, you know centuries, going back many centuries, thousands of years. Um, but I did get an opportunity to meet someone that makes the sort of primary pornography, and I felt it's a different approach, I think, to making than what I do. I think I assemble the space in a different way. I think no, I guess I'm losing track about the question here.
No, that's okay.
I think it's become very blurry for sure in the last few years of the way that the accessibility and the way that we are the barrage of images that we live with every single day.
Yeah.
And the way that pornography has entered the mainstream, or that more maybe the accessibility of these images for sure. I think that there's a kind of out of date thing that happens where you look at a pornographic image from, say, the early 20th century, and it almost takes on a kind of ephemera quality to it, where you can't really imagine someone getting like aroused by this image. It has a more almost historical artifact quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it all eventually turns into that.
I've definitely, I know I've wondered the same thing, because you'll see something that will be, what was considered a pornographic image from 1920 or something like that, and it'd be, even a photograph, and you look at it and go, that doesn't look like pornography at all, which, and it does make you wonder, well, will what we consider to be pornography, will that be pornography? Or, where is that line? I guess, and it's obviously, it's only speculative, but I think it is an interesting point, because especially even to differentiate between what pornography and art is, because it can be a gray area, and sometimes, there are artists who very much like to play with that line, and, I think rightfully so. But, the question that always kind of goes through my head is, there does seem to be a distinction between art and between pornography. I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but I almost wonder what, like in regards to nude art, why is nude art important? I don't know if you had maybe a comment or a thought on that, because that's something that, I really want to try to explore.
Yeah, I think it's just about our humanness, our obsession with ourselves. We love examining one another, and there's so many stories that can be told using all of these bodies. I think it's just important because it's us, and hopefully we will survive in some form.
Well, do you think that it does relate to, sexuality very much relates to our survival, even from an evolutionary perspective? Do you
now.
Yeah, that's true.
For now. I mean, I think that I'm a science fiction enthusiast, and I definitely have read books that suggest, it's not necessary. Maybe a future Homo sapien will not be using sex in the same way that we do now.
That's true.
I don't know.
Yeah, with technology.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the human form is immensely beautiful, and in every way, just in every way.
Do you think that there are legitimate moral, I guess, objections to utilizing nudity? Or I guess, a better question for you might be, what has been the best argument you've heard against using nudity or sexuality?
Well, our brains are forming well into our 20s, and this shit is confusing. And I think that young people, including myself, you engage with it too soon. Mm-hmm. And of course you want to, so no one's going to stop you. But I think that would be, it's just like, everyone should just take it slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that very much our biological nature is conflicting with our, I guess, our social existence. Because
Yes. Yes.
yeah, it's because now, I mean, most of the people that you meet now, they're not really getting into serious relationships and having kids until they're, 30.
30s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, because I think it's just society has become so complex. Learning how to navigate our environment it keeps being pushed back more and more. So someone in
Yeah.
their early 20s and even in mid 20s, it's, you really almost don't kind of know who you are until most people are in their later 20s, and that obviously doesn't go for everybody, but it's like,
Yeah.
wait a little bit. Who you are in your early 20s is quite a bit different than who you are going to be 10 years from now. And I think probably by the time you hit 30, you've kind of have settled a little bit, and you have an identity, within the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things a little bit. But yeah, to me it seems to be related to that.
Yes. Yes. I think there was one point we were talking about kind of just before that about the sort of the art and pornography. One of the things as I collect images is the difference between like a professionally made image and a homemade made image. And I find that the professional made image is just not appealing in any way. And I'm really struck by this. So as I'm looking through images, and I don't use these images, but they're really amazing to see. There's someone who's kind of take a picture of themselves, or it's clearly like someone that they're close with, and the image is kind of bad, kind of blurry, and the light not right, and I just find those to be the most erotic pornography that exists.
The amateur ones?
Yeah, kind of blurry and like quite like just
Bad
not
lighting
composed.
and yeah, all incandescent lighting. And yeah, almost just like a quick snapshot from someone who didn't know what they were doing. It was just totally utilitarian.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think that even somewhat speaks to the fact that so much of our lives have become so curated. And it seems that people more and more are just trying to find places that they can really see someone human. I even think of, for example, Instagram, like, think of how much people's actual pages people don't seem to be interacting with them as much as they do stories, as an example.
Right. Yes.
And I think it's because it has to do with that curated aspect. You just can't.
Yes.
It's a lot more difficult. And then I think once people start figuring out en masse how to make that their stories look super polished, I think the platform will change.
Then it'll change again. Yeah, it'll change again. Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, Grant, I need to wrap it up. I'm sorry to say. I have to get ready to get my child.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't ask you beforehand how much time you had. I apologize for that.
It's good. I didn't realize how much time. So it's definitely time for me to wrap it up.
No, but no, maybe you can just tell people where you want them to find you. And I know you.
I think Instagram is where I like to be found. My website is sort of a kind of business card. Basically, it doesn't really change very often. But no, I can do a wrap up question if you want. I don't want to just hang up on you. I just I realized I actually hadn't looked at the time, and then I realized what time it was.
Yeah. So I guess the question that I've been kind of asking everyone, just wanting to know what it is that you feel you can contribute positively to the world that is unique to you.
Well, separate from art, I'm learning how to be a good dad and a good husband, good friend, all of those things. I think that having a child and being an artist is a really exciting thing. Having her in and out of the studio and talking about all of these things. And I think that art making is not just about going in and making some art. There's a whole sort of life that's involved with it, about the you sort of view everything through making. And so I'm excited to share this with another generation. The way that if you have an idea, you can just go make that idea happen. And we're pretty crafty here, so that we're always working with our hands, growing something, baking something, painting something. And I really want to share that, or instill that you don't have to go out and buy everything. You can just you can make it work yourself here in your own place. And that's really fun. I think in a larger sense, I just love sharing all of these images that are at everybody's fingertips. Everybody can kind of see these images, and many of these images go from a smartphone to a website. And I like the idea that maybe one of these images in one of my paintings may be the only time that they're out in the analog world. And I kind of like that as even though that no one will ever know who they are, and probably the people that are in the subject will never know that they were in a painting, they are in a painting.
Yeah, that's great. No, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate all your time and talking to me and being open. And it means a lot to me. And it's hopefully this will be in the archives, for, like you said, future generations to be able to look back on. And I think your work definitely will. So hopefully this will be a positive reference point for others and as well as you. So I really appreciate everything you've done here.
Thank you, Grant, and come visit Portland.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to everyone that has listened, as well as to my guest, Dan Gluibizzi. If you enjoyed this episode and others, I would love to hear your feedback, as well as any suggestions you might have. You can contact me at grant@gtrimble.com. That's grant@gtrimble.com, or visit my website for show notes at gtrimble.com. Then click the podcast link. Don't forget to follow Dan on Instagram at Dan Gluibizzi. That's DANGLUIBIZZI. As well as my IG, that's gtrimble_photo. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your loved ones and show your support by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. And don't forget to spread the word.
Find a way to rock yourself up in